Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The session entitled The Think Tank Conversation, Bridging Regions, Building Futures will begin now. Please welcome to the stage our moderator for this session, John Yearwood, Editorial Director for Diversity and Culture at Politico.
Good afternoon, Atlantic Dialogue family. I am so glad to see you guys came back from the coffee break. The good news is that we are between you and lunch, so we're going to keep this session at about 45 minutes. So I hope that you'll be happy with that. But before we do, we have a really profoundly important conversation about think tanks, bridging futures, bridging regions. And we have an amazing group of panelists to talk about this. We'll start with a friend of who most of you know, Karim El Anawi, who is the executive president of the Policy Center for the New South. Karim, please. Then we have Sanjoy Joshi, the chairman of Observer Research Foundation in India. Sanjoy, please. And last but certainly not least, Elizabeth Sideropoulos, Chief Executive Officer of the South African Institute of International Affairs. Before we begin our conversation, we have a short film that we would like to show you.
In a world of unilateral actions and fragmented multilateral systems, think tanks serve as bridges. They connect regions, sectors, and perspectives, providing platforms for dialogue and public engagement on global issues. By promoting informed discussion on geopolitical, social, and economic transformations, think tanks help identify forward-looking responses to complex challenges. These hubs of expertise overcome divisions, build connections across regions, and generates actionable insights for policymakers and society alike. Think tanks don't just analyze the present, they collaboratively imagine and help shape sustainable futures. How can think tanks effectively bridge regional divides and create dialogue between diverse actors in a world of rising unilateralism? In a world where multilateral institutions are struggling, can think tanks drive real change, or are they limited to advisory roles? What concrete strategies can think tanks adopt to transform regional dialogues into actionable policies that shape the future?
The late 18th, 19th, early 19th century. And they have been really pivotal to a number of events that have happened in terms of shaping discussions around the world. Let's start with a question for you in terms of whether you think that think tanks at this point in time are meeting the moment. So if you would take out your interactive devices and try to answer the question, are think tanks meeting the moment? We've talked and you've heard a lot of conversation at this conference about what's happening in the U.S. There's talk there by some about the threats to democracy. We've talked about what's happening in Asia. There are a number of issues there that people wonder whether or not think tanks there are meeting the moment. And of course, certainly here in the MENA region, that is an important question. Are think tanks meeting the moment? Now, before we go to the panelists, I'd like to go to the audience. Appreciate your thoughts. And you're still voting, and thank you. Does anyone want to answer that question in the audience? I know this audience is full of think tank representatives, as well as people who run or senior fellows who are engaged with think tanks. So we'll start with the audience, and then we'll go back. We'll go to the panel. If you could please identify yourself and your first name.
Yeah, my name is Tembisa Faguda. I'm a senior research fellow and director of Africa-Asia Dialogues in South Africa. Unfortunately, I'll have to say no. Notwithstanding that I come from the fraternity, think tanks are not meeting the challenge. And because of the old traditional way of doing business, I've decided, for example, to rebrand the work that I do into public intellectualism, because information has become fluid, and fluidity requires swiftness in terms of how we answer questions and how we deal with certain challenges. Right now, by the time you finish your 3,000-word research paper, the story has moved on. And then the report becomes archived, and it becomes a waste of time and useless. So we need to repurpose how we do business, and we need to become more relevant. And I think the buzzword which we should be pursuing and encouraging henceforth within our business of think tanking is public intellectualism.
Okay, thank you. There's another comment here that we'd like to make. Please, that's the microphone.
Hi everyone, I'm O'Donnell from Martinique, a think tanker based in Washington who's led a program and who's about to launch a new think tank in Washington. I agree with what our colleague said. I think another question is how do we do better within this moment where funding is decreasing, when for those of us in the US we are threatened by the administration. So how do we build on that collective action? How do we address the critical and polarizing issues that we're facing when even just the very administrative and daily funding issues are threatening our work?
Thank you very much. Mr. Ambassador, I think you want to make a comment.
Well, I disagree completely with them. I think think tank plays a very important role, whether here in Morocco, like the Policy Center, but especially in the US, in America. I've been talking only last month in 4 think tanks. And even my people, my bosses in the foreign ministry, when they read something on a think tank, they ask me 2 things, reaction and explanation. So your think tanks are very important in forging foreign policy.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Let's take 2 more comments and then we'll go to the panel. You look like you're someone who has something to say.
Yes, Adema Bukunjet, Stanford University. I think think tanks are very relevant, but they're not sufficient. We have excluded the translational aspect of think tanks. And really, that's the part that we need to put more effort in. So it's the translational aspect that has failed. And in the past, think tanks were sufficient, but now it's no longer sufficient.
Thank you very much. And I do appreciate, there's one more comment here, and I do appreciate everyone being brief. So thank you very much. Please.
Gaudat Bagat, National Defense University. I agree with the ambassador. Trump administration's policy is a reflection of heritage program, and think tanks do play a very important role. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Karim, why don't we, didn't mean to shock you, but why don't we start with you? Surely, we're all your guests, and we do appreciate the time and care that you've taken to get us here. But I wanted to ask you, though, you're leading one of the top, certainly think tanks in Africa and one of the emerging ones in the world. Is your think tank meeting the moment?
I think we're useful, but I wouldn't say that we're a solution for all the challenges. We're part of a wider ecosystem of complex institutions that are contributing to, let's say, ideas, policy orientations, putting people together, building trust. I think it's essential. I think in think tanks, our strength is that we cooperate and partner very easily. We're sort of cabled in the same way. So that creates a safe space, if you wish, where we can have difficult discussions. And we have many instruments. I mean, publication is one, but at the heart of what we do, and for ADE, there is a knowledge that is sort of crafted in a way that is digestible for policymakers. What you do with this knowledge, the experts are very much attached to writing, because the discipline of writing is unique. Speaking is a different kind of exercise, but the discipline of writing, so it's anchored in science. But with this knowledge, you can do many things. What we're doing here today, and for those 2 days, is an exercise, which is, lots of interactions. I mean, I'm amazed. You guys never stop talking. It's very difficult to discipline you, but it's great. It means that there's an appetite to understand, to relate to each other, etc. So that's precious. In a space where we can say things, it's serious, it's agreeable, it's courteous, it's civil, but it's serious at the same time. You're serious people. This knowledge, we can share it in very small format, on a face-to-face with someone that is interested. We can share it with groups that have very opposing views, and we do these kind of things in closed-door formats. We can write short briefs. We transmit it to students. These guys, they all speak in university, in academia, through the press. So there are multiple instruments. Here we have the Atlantic Dialogue Emerging Leader Program. We transmit it to the next generation in a different way. So you see, this is much more complex, but for sure, we're just part of a broader ecosystem, and in no way a solution to the challenges of today's world. But I think these are efficient institutions in the way I tried to describe it very, very, very briefly. So they have their place, provided that they are good, expert, efficient, at scale, etc. There are conditions.
Great. Thank you, Karim. Let's go to Elizabeth. Let's hear from South Africa. There are a number of issues, and I know you head of one of the top think tanks there. How about in your case? Is your think tank at the cutting edge of what's happening, not only in your country, but also in Africa?
I'd like to echo what Karim said. You know, we're part of a broader ecosystem, and you know, there is no, while when we do projects, people expect us to be able to attribute something specifically to how you made a difference or how you affected change. It's much more complex than that, and you have to factor in, you know, the politics behind particular recommendations, proposals, etc. So it's much more complex. But if I look at my institute and more broadly sort of the South African context, I think, and this is relevant outside as well, one of the things we have to be very conscious of is the fact that there has been a movement that sees institutions such as think tanks being sort of operating in a rarefied space, disconnected not from the policy-making environment, because sometimes the policy-making environment is very elite-driven, but you are connected to it, but actually from what happens down below that. So, you know, somebody said relevance. Relevance is important. Relevance is not only important in the way in which the policy community might see think tanks as useful, and I would agree with the ambassador, think tanks are useful. We saw that also in the context of how the South African government this year engaged with the broader think tank community in the context of the G20. But that's not enough. And I think the world we're living in today requires us to actually broaden how we understand and engage with stakeholders, that it's not just about bridging the gap between the research community and the policy-making community, which is an important dimension of it, but also being very conscious of how you make the case for why the work that you do, why the evidence you produce is so critical for the kinds of policies and actions that are taken. And sometimes that there is a disconnect. So if I just reflect on the discussions we've been having this year around the G20, you know, and everything from international financial architecture to illicit financial flows to climate change. So an ordinary person in the street may say, but you guys are spending all of this money. What for? You know, how is it impacting me, a country that has one of the highest inequality rates in the world and really high unemployment among youth? And you need to be able to make that connection. We've tried, certainly, and I don't think anything is perfect. But the last point I want to make is really the engagement with the youth in many of these discussions is also critical.
If I can push back for a minute on the whole question about it being complicated. No doubt it is, and in a room full of mostly, well, not mostly, a significant number of think tank folks, they're still telling us that more should be done. How do you do that?
Well, part of it is, I love this Chinese proverb which says, you know, you cross the river feeling the stones. The environment is so fluid that you actually have to experiment. You have to very importantly recognize that the policy briefing or the paper is only the beginning of your job. It's the foundation of it, but it's only the beginning of your job. So how you innovate about the way in which you reach out to your different stakeholders, how you actually make it palatable and explainable without it coming across as being highfalutin, how you rethink your communication strategies. This is no longer about simply doing, you know, putting something up and thinking, okay, well, here is the link to the paper, people will read it. And this kind of engagement, I think, is critical. We're increasingly saying that we really have to cultivate strong relationships of trust, both with the stakeholders but also within our community, to use the knowledge that we produce in a way that can be received well and can be processed. We know that what we produce is not going to be taken, you know, stock and barrel. That this has to feed into a broader political process. But being able to have those conversations, which are often behind closed doors, one-on-one, built on the fact that I know that you're coming from a place of integrity and honesty, and I can trust you to have a very frank conversation, are increasingly more important than sort of how many papers you produce. And then relatedly, of course, how you take some of these conversations to communities that you would not ordinarily, if you think about think tanks traditionally, you would not ordinarily be having them sort of, you know, in the town hall or in the grassroots community in a rural area.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. Sanjoy, if we can bring you in here, you're from India, where, as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of issues that where the work of think tanks could and have been instrumental. Talk to us about what you have been doing, and what do you think that the work you've been doing is sufficient to meet the moment, as we said earlier?
Frankly, John, if you ask me whether it is sufficient, I'll agree with the first two interrogators here. It is not sufficient. Are think tanks doing enough? No, they are not doing enough. But let me make a small correction to the opening statement you made, a minor correction. Think tanks did not begin in the 18th and 19th centuries. Think tanks began here, where we are sitting. And they began many centuries ago. Think of the libraries of Fez. Think of the caravanserais, housing traders, which passed with their goods ivory, gold, salt, and ideas, which came across from the Sahel, from the Sub-Sahara, met here, right over here in the caravanserais, exchanged, and built up this whole momentum. You are sitting in a place which lived through the European Dark Ages. And where did the enlightenment through those Dark Ages come from? What kept that lantern blowing in the wind right through those centuries of dark? It was the ideas nurtured, exchanged right here in these locations. So I think it's very important that this conversation is being curated by the Policy Center for the New South right here in Morocco. If think tanks are not delivering today, there's a bigger crisis of legitimacy, which not just think tanks, but governments across the world, the national medias, the big media houses, think tanks are all facing. And what is that crisis of legitimacy? See, the rules-based international order has collapsed. Who were the curators? Who were the originators of the rule-based international order? It all began in these centers. And today, that rules-based international order is being interrogated in the streets of Paris, London, New York. Gen Z interrogates it in Kathmandu, Dhaka, Colombo. And you see the turmoil. They are raising fundamental basic questions which young people sitting in this room are also raising. What are think tanks doing? What are they delivering? So this is a crisis of legitimacy. It's a crisis of the discourse. Who curates that discourse? Who incubates that discourse? Is that discourse to be trusted? Is it legitimate? Or is it only going to be speaking and narrating what the power centers tell it to do? But those are bigger questions which are being asked. So the real crisis, if you really ask me, the big disruption is not Trump. The big disruption is not even a geopolitical disruption between China and the United States of America about trade, about technology, and what is happening. The bigger disruption is this crisis of confidence in a rules-based international order, which lasted from 1945, and then at the height of its moment, after the end of the Cold War, when it actually reached its zenith, came to be questioned by the very powers which initiated it, because it no longer suited their purpose. So today there are you don't find any globalists anywhere in the room, they're all in hiding. It is being questioned from two sides. The first side says it did not work for us. It ended up deindustrializing the West. The other side says, sorry, that is not true. It had no moral underpinnings. It was just a cartel of convenience, which was made up to justify actions, interventions in certain parts of the world when it suited. So now this is the crisis which has arisen. Now, how do we get out of here? How do we move out of here to create a new discourse, to create new knowledge centers, exactly which happened? So we are in dark ages. We are in the digital dark ages, maybe. And the reasons why we are in the digital dark ages, I can go on and on about it. So let us take these learnings from the history of the place where we are sitting on and see where the solutions arise. And yes, we are all parts of the discussions. We came into this room from 3 different sides, from 3 different corners, all arriving at the same point. So now let us move ahead into the next round.
Excellent. Thank you. And I do appreciate the clarification. Thank you. And lanterns blowing in the wind. I love that. And I'll take that to Karim. Do you agree in terms of the work that you're doing? Yeah. That's one thing. And the other thing I want you to think about as well, in terms of how do you get all of these lanterns in the region to blow together?
I would add one thing, is that we are also a talent factory. Like for the Policy Center, on average, young staff will spend 5 years and go somewhere else, equipped with the culture. For youngsters, 22, 23 years old, seeing every day former minister, former ambassador, former top policymakers in their daily job is very special. At the crossroad of civil society, public policy making, and academia and science, it creates very special type of people. One of the missions of the Policy Center is to create this talent factory. And what many of our colleagues went on and having great careers. The other thing is that we're structured also the transmission of the knowledge of a former ambassador, former minister, former top policy maker. It continues to work in a structured organization such as a think tank, which is completely different than doing consulting work. And there's the spirit of a public good. And its transmission, it's very valuable because that's the correct way, in fact, to transmit across generations. So you allow this transmission to happen without, managerial jobs. They're completely available, and they love to do that actually, and they can. So this is in the US. You have this revolving door mechanism. It's a little bit starting on our continent, not yet fully organized like in the US, but I see this already happening. So that's essential. On the more spiritual sort of thing, I mean, that's your posture. There are transactional think tanks. Sanjoy comes from India, so in India people they have light inside. So like we do in Morocco. So it's the purpose. So that's the sense. That's the vision. And the purpose is to nurture. In the introductory word, I say we're just custodian of a long term and a long sort of history behind us, mindful of that sort of, I said in Arabic, amana, the depository of something, to transmit it to the other generation. And that's the think tank I like to see. If think tanks behave like policymakers, they're not. If they're always busy. If you ask a think tanker a boss, a head of a think tank, if it appears to you to be always busy, he's not doing his job. You need to have time to sink in, because we're complementing the public policy decision mechanism where people are busy, they're managing politics, it's normal. But we create a space, a safe space, a space where ideas get exchanged, and this takes time. And this was why these institutions were created, because we're a parenthesis in the chaotic sort of this public decision-making process, the media thing. So that's why we need to create a safe space.
And I want to go to Elizabeth in a second, and I also want to get back to the audience and say that soon we'll return this conversation to you, because we want to definitely hear your thinking on some of these. But if you're in this safe space, many in the audience is saying that the work that's being done in this safe space is not aggressive enough to tackle the issues that are confronting us. In this safe space, are folks too comfortable?
Look, as I said, this is one format. There are other formats. And it's not because you are aggressive and you want something that you're efficient. You don't win a revolution by your heart. You win it by your brain. Okay? That's something that is essential. So you have to be for the long run. These are complex things. And I think the more the world is chaotic, as described by Sanjoy, the more useful we are, in a way, because we are creating that pacified space. This is a very large space. As I said, they're much smaller format where we can have much more difficult discussions. But this is very good to capture the mood and what worries people, and also to build the social capital that we need together. But it's a specific exercise. And the fact that you meet here in Morocco is not by accident, because it is possible. This is not possible everywhere. It's possible in other places, but it's not possible everywhere. It takes an underlying culture, an underlying sort of openness, to a variety of opinion to express themselves. It takes for us the space to do it, which is not granted everywhere. So there are many preconditions there. But I think I would summarize it as I said. It's your deposit, you're a custodian of something that is very valuable in the spirit of what Sanjoy described. And all of us at the Policy Center, and I recognize this in other think tanks, is essential. And this is the one we cooperate best with. If it's too transactional, it's too short term, it's fine. It's a different kind of job. So that's we need to transact, but that's not what we should be doing all the time.
Elizabeth, you win the revolution by the head, not the heart, correct? It reminds me of an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. Which makes me wonder about whether or not think tanks, yours and others, can really succeed by going alone, or is it necessary to create partnerships, not only around the continent, but around the world?
No, you're absolutely correct. And I think what you have seen in the first instance in the continent, in Africa, but then also over the last decade and more across the world is think tanks actually developing partnerships, networks with other think tanks. On the African continent, I think we have some think tanks that have been around for a long time, some much newer, many of them focusing a lot on domestic issues, not necessarily always sort of looking outward. But I think that's also changing. And what we have seen emerge over the last several years is really collaboration and interaction, using both fora such as these, which almost act as kind of a kind of Tinder sometimes, if I use that term, to actually build relationships. I think the point that Karim made about identifying whether you're in the same spirit, you're driven by the same purpose. It's not just about the transaction. In my institute, it's equally about how you build and cultivate young people and have them move out into the policy space and more broadly into society to make contributions, meaningful contributions. As as it is in terms of identifying areas that we can work together on. What are the issues that are important for us that we need to amplify as African think tanks in the first instance in global fora? And importantly, what are the friends and champions outside of the continent, if we just look at it on the continent, that we can work together with because we have the same purpose and the same objectives? And I think that has really picked up momentum. We also see that being recognized by international organizations and institutions are actually reaching out to many of us, some of us around here, to actually work together with us and to better understand where we're coming from and the concerns that our countries have in terms of the way they interact and they engage with them. So also recognizing that bringing in these perspectives into some of these institutions that are problematic. You talked about it, Sanjay, the sort of rules-based institutions of the post-1945 order are increasingly recognizing that you need to bring in these diverse voices and get them to work together to articulate positions.
Terrific, Elizabeth. Well, let's return the conversation to the audience. And I want to start with Dr. Sarah Olimo, who I've been talking to for the last few days, who had some really interesting observations about the information that we are involved in and what we've been hearing the last few days. Doctor, if you can please identify yourself again, and if briefly.
Briefly, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So, my name is Dr. Sarah Olembo, and I'm here because I was told about this forum by my daughter Udwa Kamimo, whom you know very well. I come in here as a women leader because I mentor women in Africa in areas of agroecology and agriculture in broad daylight. One of the things that we have done at Awola is to create space for women's voices to be heard in fora like this one. At the moment, we are in the African region, and this is the first time that I, from Awola, will be present in these discussions. Women, as I indicated, a major area of concern has been seeds, which had been criminalized for many years because of this unification which comes out of UPOV, where you have said here that unity is bad because in UPOV the seeds are uniform, stable, and they are distinct, stable, and uniform. But you know, for Africa, agroecology promotes seeds that are diverse, and we know how very well they address issues of climate change. So that is one area that we have been able to fight and win, and now our seeds have been liberated, and our farmers can be able to do what they want to do with the seeds. And it is because of the peasant farmers that went to court and fought for that space. And so we need to clap for the indigenous people. One other area where indigenous people have also won is in issues we are starting in water. And I want to be able to go back home into Awola and tell them that matters of water were heard in this forum and that we have created a space for these Atlantic dialogues to deal with waters, but making women to lead. Because you know that when women lead, many things happen. We have seen the case of Senegal, and in Kenya again, the Baringo people who are indigenous and whose land was taken because of the hot springs in Lake Bogoria by the president himself, President Moi. He took that land. But the indigenous people who are led by women went to the African court, and they were able to win the case. And in the Gambia, you know that we have got a statute there that stands in there, and anybody who is being deprived because they are small, because they are indigenous, can go to that court. So it is in the Gambia, and you know that that has won a case for us. And so in this space, I know that you can also help me to win on the issues of water, because it is important, and we know that without water, without land, without seeds, we cannot grow. And yet 80% of the food that is on the continent is produced by women. So I hope that I can go with a message that can please my women, and we can take water as the next front that we are going to fight and be able to lead again in that area to win the battle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, there are a number of questions. I think, is there someone back here, if we can? We'll
Hello.
take several questions, and then we'll return it to the panel.
I'm Foskariani. I work on election integrity at Meta, and I'm one of the emerging leaders of this year's Atlantic Dialogues. One of the opening statements mentioned crisis of confidence in the international rules-based order, but I want to ask a question about another crisis, which is the crisis of expertise. And if there's one thing think tanks do, it is employ experts. And in an information environment where facts have increasingly are increasingly being weaponized and understanding of interpretations is increasingly polarized, what role should think tanks play in restoring confidence and expertise, or is there a different path to take? Should we just accept that we live in an era of differing interpretations of reality? So could think tanks do more in restoring confidence and expertise? Thank you.
Yeah, I think, yeah, sure. Muslim Maimani. Firstly, I think sitting in the room, one, it's a great opportunity for dialogue to take place, and it's most appreciated in terms of that work. The danger we all face is to how do we stop the program from not being an elitist program? If think tanks are going to be effective, the question has to be asked about whether we take the knowledge pool that we have and translate it to the ordinary folks in terms of their own processing of decision making, because those are the people who do one of two things. They elect people who are incompetent with all the power and leave the people who are competent but with none of the power sitting in this room. So the fundamental issue is how do we merge the two so that there's a conscientization of society? And I would urge that for maybe policy people who are practitioners, sometimes they treat think tanks as a distant because sometimes what you present can contradict what people want to do if they are intent on doing wrong things for society. So let's conscientize the most ordinary citizen is all I'm asking.
Thank you. We'll take, let's do 3 more comments. We'll take one back here.
Very quick question. How do we prevent the consultants from taking over our jobs? Because they've gotten into the government space.
That's a good question. On this side, I don't think we've taken any questions from here yet.
Thank you, sir. My name is Dahan Ahmed Mahmoud. I think now we have lots of problems and very complex and very numerous, and that the states, the decision makers and political decision makers, they have no time for this. They are with their nose in the everyday life problems. So it falls on the think tanks to think a little further. But my question or my purpose is that the big player, big international players, they are aware of this. So they tend to make the most successful of the think tank go their way to accomplish their own agenda. So how we prevent that?
Thank you very much. We'll take a question here. Is there anyone from a think tank in the East? I know we've represented Africa, the US, other places. Anyone from the East? Okay, we'll take the question.
Thank you. Karim, congratulations for this roundtable. I cannot help myself. I have to cite Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel and say that think tanks are like bridges over troubled waters. No. But my point is that my experience as a person, as a professor, is that my students, each year that passes, they do not read. They do not memorize. They are culturally and behaviorally transforming themselves. And the culture and society is where they are. So my point is that think tanks are not only important for policy making, they are very much important to develop the habit of conversation between people, everywhere, every place. That's my point. This is not the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If
We
I may
have one more comment here. We'll take this one. We'll take yours first, please.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Naima Korshi, and me, I'm working. I have an NGO, and I work a lot with think tanks. My point is about the credibility on the power of think tanks from the global south. When I was working in international organizations, and of course we read what is great think tanks, but the majority, what our analyses are based of think tanks from the north. When it's the US, it's like, oh yes, it's credible. So I'm very proud and happy that Policy Center is now one in Africa that is very well known and credible, but how many really the power of researcher of think tanks from the global south for international organization and international leaders? Because from my own experience, when it's US or Europe, oh yes, it's like automatically, yeah, they're credible. But we don't pay attention enough to the think tank from global south. Thank you.
Can you do this in 20 seconds?
Yeah, okay. For sure. Leonardo Paraga from the Colombian Coalition on YPS. So there was recently a report by the UN about how these reports are never read. And in general, when it comes to think tanks, well, there was the discussion how to be more effective and how to translate this into real-world results. So what do you see as some next steps that think tanks could take to really materialize some of these findings into change in societies?
Great, thank you. And you promised 10 seconds.
10 seconds. Yes, I'll be very short. Professor Dainaru said that it's a factory of talents, and I would add also a factory of an idea. And linking it to the previous discussion, wouldn't think tank be, I would suggest that think tank become, if it's not already, a component of South-South cooperation or just cooperation. That's a place where people are sharing ideas. It's not between expert and non-expert, it's between people with the same level.
Okay, so we'll come back to the panel. I think there was someone, was there someone there? Can you do this really quickly? Yes. I know your hand was that.
Yes, hi. I'm Vemba Pezo Dizolele, former senior fellow and director of the Africa program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. One of the biggest challenges for think tanks is, one is the funding, two is the narrative. As long as Africa does not drive its own narrative, we'll continue having problems. OCP, a new center here, is important because they get the funding. We have SAIA, we have ISS, but the rest of the continent is pretty much a void, and we cannot do that without that help.
Thank you. I appreciate for all the everyone in the audience for keeping your comments brief. We have about a minute left for each panel. We have about a minute left for each panelist to summarize and give their closing thought. We'll start with Sanjoy.
I'll just address the question on narratives. I think we've moved beyond narratives now. See, this conflict of narratives that every fact has a counterfactual to it and which fact do you believe in. The think tanks are here precisely for that. That this is not about narratives. No, there are deeper underlying truths and which need to be debated. The whole purpose of getting 20, 30, 40 different voices into one room, like we do here at the Policy Center for New South, or we do at the Observer Research Foundation's Rice-Na Dialogues, or we do it at Cape Town in the different conversations we have, is to exchange conversations which are not being had in other important corners of the world. Please remember that. Those conversations do not take place in Washington, D.C. Those conversations do not take place in Brussels. They take place here in Rabat. They used to take place in Marrakesh. And they happen where Elizabeth comes from. So the idea of getting these people in to have these voices heard is extremely important. To create these platforms, it is not just about writing papers. It is about disseminating. We all think tanks, including the Policy Center of New South today, are very much in the public intellectual space. They are on social media, they interact. If you start looking at actually the websites, the YouTube channels of some of these think tanks, look at the Observer Research Foundation, there are over 1 million views to conversations. It is not that they are not being heard, they are being heard. How much action is being taken on them is a different matter, because action also depends on the capacity of the organizations meant to take those actions, and today that space is very limited.
Thank you, Sanjoy. We'll go to Elizabeth, about a minute.
So to pick up on the point that Musi made about elitism and that disconnect, I think that's where initiatives like the one we have around young people and making them more active and aware in preparing to be part of policy discussions is one dimension of it, because we have seen them take it back into their communities. These are young people who've been involved with the Institute coming from very, very varied backgrounds. But more importantly, they have come to us and said, we want to make a change in our community because of what we have been engaged on in terms of the policies we've recommended. And they have actually gone back, and we have a sort of a mini project that's called Implementers, Youth Implementers for Change. They've gone back and developed mini projects, whether it's on recyclables or renewables or whatever, in their communities, working together with their communities. And this is one bridge between some of the work that think tanks are doing and sort of taking that into, beyond the elite, into areas that really matter.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Karim, final comments? About 45 to 50
I see PhD
seconds.
students that are invited here, and I had some of them in classes. You don't have to intervene. I'll do the ambassadorship for you. We don't have time. And you see it's 0 there, so we want to finish. But I can tell you they read. And we make them read. Okay? They're very smart young people here. They read. I mean, I'm enthusiastic about the younger generation. I mean, let us be careful. The second point is that it's, as the discussion has shown, is a sophisticated institution. It's about culture. It's about trust. It's about social interaction. The best contribution we can do is the transmission. The transmission and the development of two brains, fast and slow, like in Kahneman, analytical and transactional. The best people in policy making are intellectual technocrats, capable of thinking and strategizing and having a culture and thickness in terms of understanding what human beings are to craft the best policy with reason and wisdom, with passion and ethics. So we carry those values, and this is what may be the most transformational things we're doing. If I want to be more operational and invite all here, you have kids, or they are youngster here, but you have kids, go on the webpage of the Policy Center. Sorry, France. There are 7 instruments to reach out to the younger generation. It's called the Youth Leadership Initiatives. And we have a young professional program, we have internships, we have debates in regions of Morocco to avoid that elitist sort of bias. But that's what we do, transmission and contributing with the ecosystem, with the education system at large, and this is not by accident that we're hosted within a university. The challenge of a country like Morocco to move from middle income to high income is a challenge of the quality of the education of the people we have. That's how you get productivity, and when you have a strong growth in productivity, you are off the hook. That's the challenge of Africa in general. If we have smart people, we're good. So we should invest in that. And that's the small contribution, the modest contribution that we're trying to do as think tanks, which are small institutions in the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karim. Please, everyone, please join me in thanking this outstanding panel. And then I guess lunch will be served.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Panelists are asked to remain on stage for a group photo. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your participation this morning. We will now break for lunch at the pavilion behind this building and reconvene at 3:05. We hope you will enjoy your meal.